Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I had a bad moment. I was coming up in the elevator, and I saw that I was speaking, which was it's always nice to see your name in an elevator. But then I saw that I was speaking about rabbis, philosophers, and reformers, the Jewish community in Prague in the intellectual landscape of late medieval Bohemia. And then I figured I didn't really have enough time to prepare that, so I'll just have to go with what I've done. Now, I'm shamefully literal sometimes. A while ago, somebody called me at NYU, and they said, "We'd like you to teach a course on music and society." So I spent a lot of time preparing a course called Music in Society, only to find out that the course was actually Music and Society. And it turned out that I had to prepare another course because the difference between music in society and music and society. So when I was asked to write this chapter on Jewish musical experience in the Czech Lands, I agreed, only to realize I had to figure out what it meant and then how to think about it. Now, you could say, to cut to the chase, like, oh, just get with it, just write the chapter. But still, you have to think it through. So let me begin even before that with some thanks, though. Certainly to Eva Derman and her organization for inviting me, and always to the staff at the Bohemian National Hall for providing top-notch support. Hope I'm not jinxing it, but I can't tell you how many talks I've given here, and nothing's ever gone wrong, and it goes wrong a lot elsewhere, so I'm really delighted. I wanted to thank Veronika Seidlova in Prague for sending me both a new article of hers and some recordings, and Matt Austerklein for sending me just yesterday some fascinating material on this subject I didn't know about, a Jewish parade to honor the emperor. Anyway, so I'm trying to figure out what this means, and as I go, I'm going to really refer to two problems. This is a little bit of a dull part, so I hope you get through it. It's very short, but anyway, I have two issues that I'm sort of thinking through constantly. One is the issue of grouping and making sets. So whenever you try to make a set of things, unless they're absolutely identical, in which case why make a set, one inevitably finds things that belong in that set, and then things that are outside it. So if we were thinking of the set of Czech music, most of us would have no trouble including Dvorak in that set, and most of us would have no trouble with the idea that Wagner was not in that set. But what about Czech songs that are also claimed by Germans with German lyrics, or the symphonies of Mozart contemporaries like Johann Stamitz, who made their careers in German lands, or some of the other composers we'll meet tonight? So in a way, when you try to make a set, you usually end up with a set with fuzzy edges. And then you have to do a gut check as to whether you believe that the set with fuzzy edges is sustainable, or whether the fuzzy edges eat their way towards the middle and you don't really have a set. Or it overlaps with so many other sets that you have to take care of how literally you speak about it. The second issue is really sort of crude, but it has to do with the question of what I'd call lumping and splitting. And that is a kind of interesting idea to me. So we tend to want to, along with the idea of sets, either to lump or split. Sorry, this is just a second. Nothing makes you want to curse like losing your cursor. The cursor's gone. It's like I once was turning pages at a piano recital, at Charles Ives' piano recital. It was a marathon, and the copy was old, and I turned the page and it flew somewhere. And I thought it flew under the piano, so in this, my great moment, I'm crawling under the piano, and people are saying, it's in the curtain. So does anybody see the cursor here, or is it? Oh, oh, wait. Okay. Okay. But I can't get to it. I'll change the display and let you see my notes if I can. Hold on a second. Sorry. Well, I'm just going to have to wing it here with, I have some notes on this. So lumping and splitting. You could say, for example, that all the four composers who are known as the big four Czech composers are, are all Czech, and they all belong together in a set. So you'd be a lumper. But you could also say that if you know anything about their temperaments, that composers like Janacek and Smetana and Martinu and Dvorak couldn't be more different in terms of temperament and approach, in which case you would then be a bit of a splitter. You would refuse to sort of simply accept that they belong in a set, and then you might look for other composers who are type Janacek or type Smetana or Dvorak. And so as I go through, I'm going to try to talk about this. But I thought I'd try to begin with a piece that, at least as far as I'm concerned, does actually probably fit into the Jewish music experience in the Czech Lands. So I was also trying to figure out, since I say this so many times, whether I should abbreviate it. And I thought, Jemekel. And then I thought, well, Jemechel, because Czech is ch. And I thought Joni Mitchell, but I'll try to get through that. So, okay. So I can't play my examples if my cursor is not here. So, well, you, oh, wait. Right, so, but I can't see it on my screen, but this is a test. Thank you. So that was written by Gideon Klein, Czech composer, Czech-speaking composer, born in Moravia. It's got an impeccable Jewish pedigree. He was incarcerated in Terezin when he wrote this because of his religion. And again, I think we'd have to agree it's part of the Jewish experience, part of the Czech Jewish experience. But again, pedigrees can be tricky. The melody is taken from a nigun created in Mykolaiv in the Ukraine. There's nothing Czech about that. It was composed by two brothers, Avram and Sholem Charitonov. The family argues about which one actually wrote it, but one just told me it must be Sholem, the other said it must be Aaron. Probably before the First World War, maybe around 1900. And here's, if I can get my cursor again, this is the earliest recording of the nigun itself.
The nigun is Aaron Sheretz Nikolaev. Ki hinengachoymer ביבבדאיו יציר מרצה ימרחיב מרצה מגציר נקילנה
So that's the nigun. That was the basis for that, and of course it was later turned into an Israeli folk song. And here's what that sounds like with the word
שכב במנוחה על נתיב כמרה על ידך יושבת אמך שומרת מכל רע מיילל בחוץ שטן ונושבת רוח שם אך אתה בני הקטן נו משך וישן.
Okay, so that's the sort of Israeli version. The Palestine Mandate version. It was in 1930s, and then it made its way over to England, where it was recorded two different collections in Germany. One a collection saying basically Jews get out of town, and the other collection saying Jews, your fate is with the Germans, stay here and don't worry. And so one of these copies got into to Terezin, where it was set by Klein. So different variants, Klein's version. It's Czech, of course, but it's also mixed. It's also Ukrainian. It's also got various things from all over Europe. So, but it's still, I think that we can include in the set that we want to look at. But what about this one? Let's see. Whoops, blank screen. Okay, so this is really.
Bala with the South African national anthem for the first time in a rugby international in this stadium. Okay, so that's the South African national anthem. That doesn't belong in the Czech Jewish set. Well, I think not, but actually, it's very interesting. They had a contest to see who would write the new anthem for South Africa. And apparently they got 200 submissions. They were all Drek. They couldn't use any of them. So Nelson Mandela said, well, why don't you take the hymn of the
African National Congress, the Nkosi Sikalele Africa, God Bless Africa, and put it together with the apartheid song. And that way you'll join the country together, the old and the new. It turns out that the person who actually was charged with doing this was a Jewish composer named Jean Zeidel Rudolph, who may have Czech roots. So you can never dismiss things too quickly. But what she was really responsible for, I don't know what you could maybe tell some of you, that when you put these songs together, the range is different enough so that you have to move it into a new key. Otherwise, it would be too high or too low for people to sing it. In the middle of the South African national anthem was a Jewish modulation. Anyway, but still, okay, maybe not in that set. So let's return to something more in this set again. And here we have a lovely piece. It's a tribute to how small the world was. When my wife and I went on our honeymoon to Prague in Czechoslovakia in 1977, we went many times to the so-called Old New Staronova Synagogue, Alt Neu Schule, where this man, Victor Feuerlicht, held forth. A kind man, serious but merry, his voice with an elegant scratch sort of rang out for decades. So this is his Lecha Dodi, recorded in 1980. Now, I'd been looking for a recording of Cantor Feuerlicht only to discover that this recording was actually made by my wonderful old friend and colleague, Judith Frigyesi, whose husband, Zev Feldman, you heard mentioned tonight. So this is a perfect example of Czech Jewish music. So let's listen to a little bit of his Lecha Dodi. So again, a perfect example of Czech Jewish music, except if you want to split hairs as a splitter, Cantor Feuerlicht was actually born in Ruthenia and studied in Romania at a time when the borders were shifting as quickly as sand dunes. He studied with the Satmar Rebbe, Joel Teitelbaum. So while it's part of the Jewish musical experience in the Czech lands, it's not clear that there's anything specifically Czech about his music, or maybe there is. I should add, when we first heard him sing, he sang it differently. In 1977, instead of Lecha Dodi Lekrat Kala, it was Lecha Dodi Lekrat Kala. So even those little changes, and who knows, maybe the transform version of it had to do with the influence of the community where he was. Well, here's another one we want to say, is it the Jewish experience or not? Probably not. This is, oh geez, now you can't even see the now you can't even see the slides. What's gone on here, tech? Well, anyway, it's a how do you describe it? It's a manuscript of the Czech, what's now the Czech national anthem, Kde domov můj. And I can at least play a version of it on my very own music box. But just a few numbers before Gdej domov môj, there is a strange piece. It's called The Chorus of the Little Jews, Zbor Žiďatek. And it's an anti-Semitic caricature complete with Orientalist steps. There's this, again, anti-Semitic caricature. One of my Czech colleagues, who I respect and like, brushed this off, saying it really wasn't a problem. And the man who wrote the program notes, or the liner notes for this score, said, we're not worried about the racial problems. The Jew, Chevelis, with another bunch of Jews, is no way mocked or despised. He presents them lifelike, just like other figures. The Jew is simply a creditor. I had to take a long and mandated sexual harassment training, which is required by law at NYU and supposedly almost every other university. And one of the things that really caught my attention was, well, from the point of view of this harassment, intention really doesn't matter. You say, oh, I didn't mean, no. You have to understand what's harassment and what matters. And I thought in this spirit, it doesn't matter. This is an anti-Semitic caricature, and the fact that, 20, 30 years after Auschwitz, people are brushing it off, when it's a foundational part of the Czech national identity, this piece with its own national anthem, seemed really unusual to me. Okay, so as you can see, this is 15th century little painting from the breviary of Count Lobkowitz, again, music of Jews in the House of God, a miniature. Maybe some of you have seen this. I think it might have been shown in another talk here. Now, like most history, almost nothing in it can be fully verified. We have evidence that there was instrumental music in synagogues, but we don't know what it was like, and we don't actually know whether this is something of an accurate rendition of what it looked like to be in a synagogue, whether it was since it was a breviary, a Christian fantasy about what they think it would have looked like in a synagogue with various attitudes, or it could be a complete fantasy, completely made up. We can see the various instruments played. It's really absolutely impossible, I think, to reconstruct what the sound would have been like. Looking at the instruments together in the crowd, it seems to me would be something like whack, because you've got the organs and the trumpets and the drums. But again, it is an absolutely fascinating, somewhat unexpected image of what's going on. And again, so much of what we try to do as historians is try to sort of imagine these kinds of scenes, try to make models and try to figure out what things might have sounded like. Now, it's perfectly true that even in medieval music, when there is notation, we still don't know what it sounded like. We don't know what the rhythms were like. We don't know what the accentuations are like. But in this case, we're sort of left entirely to the imagination. So I thought I would put a slide actually refers to the largest amount of music, which is all the music that's missing, all the music we don't have access to, we don't know. And again, it's a trite observation perhaps, but it's easy enough to sort of fill our what we used to call floppy disks with enough information so that we can think that we know what happened or how it happened. But when we begin with what we don't know, then we realize what a sea we're swimming in. But let's go back. Again, this is a couple of pieces I wanted to mention. When we were in Brno in 1978, we went to a Yom Kippur service in the synagogue there, and the rabbi, who was, I guess, in his 80s, and his two sons, who were in their 50s and 60s, sang a version of the Kol Nidre, but using Moravian folk harmonies. And there's no recording of this; it doesn't exist anywhere. And again, there may have been klezmer concerts. We know there were klezmorim in Prague at various times, but again, we have no idea what it sounded like. When I was in Czechoslovakia in the 70s, I was taken to Jewish graveyards and synagogues. I have to tell you, other than in a synagogue, I heard not a single note of anything that would be thought of as Jewish music. There was no klezmer. Maybe there was, but I never heard it. Nobody was playing the Terezin composers. And again, one had a sense that there was no Jewish life. People, when I first came and people said, "What's your background?" And I said, "I'm Jewish." They said, and you admit it? And the only person who spoke about being Jewish was a Russian violist named Vladimir Bloch, who came up to me at a conference and says, "I am Jew, are you Jew too?" And that was it for the entire year. So there was no, in all my time there, really Jewish music other than in the old new synagogue and in Brno. But let's get back to our quest. Let's look for real Jewish music, Jewish Czech music. Anybody recognize it? First variation. Anybody know the tune? Ja mam konie, right? It's a little Czech children's song. If you go home and Google most popular Czech children's songs, you'll hear this. This cute little tune. Well, this is composed by Ignác Moscheles. Again, charming piece. He was a German-speaking Bohemian Jew. This is his Opus 48. And while it's true that Moscheles eventually converted to Christianity, we could argue that his relationship to the Czech lands means that this ought to be considered a piece of Czech or Bohemian Jewish music. Although many might be more tempted, considering the tune and Moscheles' birthplace in Prague, to just consider it part of a putative field of Czech music.
or Czech music by a German speaker. Of course, we would then have to ask if the fact that Moscheles eventually settled in Vienna ultimately made him less of a participant in Czech music history, or comparatively, his conversion to Christianity made him less of a Jew. But when he wrote this, he was a Czech Jew. Another fun fact, Moscheles was a very close friend of Felix Mendelssohn, another converted Jew, and Moscheles maintained that the famous slow movement of the Italian symphony, da-ti-ti-ta, da-da-ti-ta, was based on a Czech pilgrim song. So a converted Czech Jew commenting on the Italian symphony of a converted German Jew. Here is another piece, but this is another vanished world. This is all that remains of Pavel Hase's Partita in the old style composed in Terezín. We have only the incipit of the fugue because it was written in somebody's kind of memory book, and the rest of it's lost. It's a strange fugue subject. So it's a kind of chromatic. Sorry. So an edgy little fugue. That's all. That's the last piece Pavel Haas wrote. He was sent to Terezín a few weeks later, to Auschwitz a few weeks later, and this is all that's left of it. So that's another thing that we deal with in this area of Jewish experience in the Czech lands are these fragments and variants and other mysteries as well. This is a kind of curious thing. It's the title page for Hase's Hebrew language setting, Al Safod, a setting of a labor Zionist poem. Now, of course, pretending to be musical notes, can anybody read what it actually says? In memory of the first year and hopefully the last in our Terezín exile. And somebody has written, you can see right there, the little treble clef has turned that into sof, the end. So this is a kind of little musical mystery, a joke, I think, but as my old friend Jarmil Berghauser, the composer and Dvorak scholar, used to say, furrowing his brow, a serious joke. Okay, here's another image. So you might ask, why would I, vice president of the Dvorak Society, or DAHA, put an X through Dvorak? These are the big four composers, right? Smetana, Dvorak, Janacek, who never had red hair, and Martinu. So why would I do that? Yes, it's true. Dvorak was the only major Czech composer not to have a Jewish girlfriend, and I don't think this is irrelevant. Smetana, when he was in Sweden, sort of in Göteborg, Gothenburg, had a Swedish girlfriend, Fröida Benecke. There's every evidence that they had a child together. In fact, I don't know if it's true. I'm not, I haven't gotten into my composer gossip phase yet, but there is a man named Itzhak Smetana in Israel who claims to be a descendant and has the story that after Smetana's death, his mother, Fröida, went to the Czech lands, went to Prague, and got permission from the emperor to use the Smetana name to pass on. Who knows? Famously, Janacek, well, again, historical what-ifs are maybe not the province of the most mature thinking, but try to imagine Janacek's last years without Kamila Stoslova. This was a woman that he dedicated practically every work he wrote from the time he was 62 to the time he died in 1928, so at the age of 74. It's funny, I always used to say that it was a very wise choice
for me to have chosen Janacek because, you know, if you were a Mozart scholar, you had to contend with the fact that, you know, you're in your 40s and 50s and Mozart's been dead for years. But with Janacek, I always said, well, but now I'm almost the same age, so I have to watch out. But in any case, Janacek is unthinkable without his relationship with Kamila Stoslova, who is, of course, Jewish. And we know that when he was in New York and teaching at Tanglewood, Martin, who had a very serious fling with a woman named Ro Barstow. And what's interesting about that is that they had a very intense correspondence, which is now lost, where Martinu apparently spoke a great deal about all the creative impulses behind his works. So even though it's kind of a joke with crossing out Dvorak, you know, even that part of the connection between Jews and Czech ideas is a profound one. And if you were to add a fifth to the big four, you might well have chosen Peter Eben. Peter Eben was a wonderful composer, considered maybe the greatest composer of the last half of the 20th century, and he was born Jewish, like Mendelssohn and Moscheles and many others, converted to Catholicism, was brought up Catholic, but the Nazis didn't think he was Catholic, and so when he was 14 years old, he spent a couple of years in Buchenwald. And so even though, of course, one doesn't think of him generally as Jewish, yet considering his background and his experiences, again, if we're splitters, lumpers, depending on how we want to look at it, we could say he's just Catholic. What are you talking about? Or we could say, no, he's a participant in this larger world. Well, here's an obvious one, right? And just a couple of days ago, Raphael Mostel, a wonderful composer, wrote to me and said that this eminent Mahler scholar, Lagrange, insisted that there was no evidence or little evidence, or no evidence actually of Mahler using Jewish ideas or anything Jewish about it. So, and you know, when we hear this, we can maybe believe that. So that's Leonard Bernstein conducting the famous Adagietto from the Fifth Symphony. But you know, when we go to this, like. Mahler isn't somehow referring to all kinds of different traditions. And again, one of the nice things about music is that nobody can tell you what you should be hearing. Nobody can tell you which part of the piece is the important one. So no, you can say, well, yeah, but he just uses it there, that's not important. Well, I happen to have a completely unsubstantiated but quite passionate theory of middles that suggests that, you know, openings are fairly standardized and they face the rest of the world, and that's not where you're going to put the delicate, strange, weird secrets that torment your soul. And so, you know, you could say, yes, it's in a passage like that, right in the middle of the middle, where Mahler is showing something of himself. So again, and then there's this. Let's see.
Vezurei,
Sorry, I hate to turn it off. Well, many of you recognize the Frank Sinatra of Czechoslovakia, or maybe Frank is the Karel Gott of the United States. This is, of course, so this is, while this is Jewish and Czech, one might, depending on one's lumping and splitting desires, when you get up in whatever morning, you know, sort of wonder whether what this is. Is Frank Sinatra singing "By Mir bist du schön" part of the Jewish, you know? So it's sort of on the edge. I mean, you know, he had an amazing voice. I don't actually know, maybe somebody does, how this recording came about and the sort of bizarre cinematography of it. But it's really a kind of interesting thing. But we might ask, is this part of, you know, the Jewish musical experience? I just a nod to this. This is, some of you may recognize it. It's from the film that was in English called Divided We Fall, Musíme se pomáhat. And the music is composed by Aleš Březina, who's a friend of mine. And I love the score. The film deals with the relationship between the fate of Jews and the relationship with Gentiles in a small Czech town during the war. Aleš is not Jewish, but the musical supervisor of the film was Chava Alberstein, and this to me is certainly music related to the Jewish musical experience, even though it wasn't written by a Jewish composer, and there's nothing specifically Jewish about the music, no caricature aspect of it that you can speak to. Well, here's one more thing.
Es treten auf Kaiser Overall von Atlantis, in eigener Person, den man schon seit Jahren nicht gesehen hat, denn ist in seinem Riesenpalast eingeschlossen, ganz allein, besser regieren zu können.
Well, an opera written in German by an anthroposophist. What does that have to do with us? Well, this was The Emperor of Atlantis. It was written but never performed in Theresienstadt, in Terezin. Though Ullmann was, again, not a Jew, by belief, again, an anthroposophist, he was imprisoned because the Nazis thought he was Jewish. This powerful and unusual opera was actually never censored by the SS, which is what people used to think. It was actually censored by the Jewish authorities, who were afraid it would cause problems in the camp. Like a kind of grown-up Brundebar, it deals with death and tyranny in its own way. Often described as a Silesian-born Austrian composer, and though he died in places now a part of Poland, Ullmann was undeniably part of this culture, Jewish Czech culture. He was a critical person in Terezín, in working with other people to keep the cultural life alive. He wrote many reviews. And again, it's often difficult not to look at the history of Jewish music in the Czech lands and related experiences through the lens of Terezín and the places where people like Ullmann were ultimately sent, and where Ullmann was actually killed on arrival, the same transport as Hans Krasse, Pavel Haas, and many, many others. So another observation here, after this cataclysm, rebuilding some kind of Jewish life in the Czech lands has not been without challenges. And I just wanted to look at one effort and some of its excitements and problems. This is something called Städelfest, and that's a kind of revival. It asks questions. The very name of the event, the Städelfest, which is this, again, festival in Brno, recalls an aspect of Jewish culture, the shtetl, that never really existed in the Czech lands. And the mixture of klezmer, Hasidic culture, memorialization, and references to various secular Jewish activities may or may not come together in the coming years. It's only been going for a couple of years to create something dynamic. On the other hand, according to the director of the festival, Eva Yazdikova, the festival not only has as its mandate the enrichment of Jewish cultural life, but something perhaps even more significant, a place for the return of families who have lived in Brno in the past and were forced to leave. So, during normalization, some of the most common Czech souvenirs were little Švejk dolls, the good soldier Švejk. Some with backpacks had tiny little photos of Prague. And Švejk was a kind of a symbol that people referred to with double-edged sword of how do you deal with an oppressive power, and Švejk was an uneasy but persistent model. But after 1989, with the country no longer under the thumb of a great power that needed to be manipulated, Švejk began to take a back seat to the golem, a perfect symbol for the varied mythologies of the Czech Jewish community. And there's all these golems all over Prague. Today, though, there's still another site that will greet visitors. In actually now many shop windows in downtown Prague, you can see vast hordes of little Jews, maybe like the March of Little Jews from Scrope's piece. And many of them are musicians. Again, some of them are playing cellos and some violins. We can find accordions, bagpipes. The bagpipes seem to be blown pipes like the Scottish ones, so they're clearly not Czech pipes, which are pumped and not them. The absurdity of these little Orthodox klezmerine bears as much real relationship to any Czech musical tradition as does the persistent treat known as a trdelník. And it's evidence of what Tomáš Kraus, who I spoke to about this, calls American fiddler-on-the-roof culture based on roots of the Carpathian shtetls. By this, of course, he means Jewishness as a kind of performance in costume, but in this case, one without roots in the Czech lands. In the end, because this is the end, we must ask whether we really have to lump and split. Can't Moscheles and Ullmann and Mahler, but also Pavel Haas and Petr Eben, just be composers without having to be stuck in a group or with these figures of these composers, sometimes stuck between groups? Nobody knows what to call them. Czech composers, Czech Jewish composers, Jewish composers. Why can't they just be composers? Of course they can. But then we ask, is their relationship to any putative Czech Jewish experience irrelevant? And we must answer to that, no, it is not. And that's why I think we have to go back and forth between lumping and splitting and grouping and not grouping, using various lenses and models to keep asking and exploring, even with no guarantee that at the end we will actually understand all these things any better. Thank you.